Hello guys, this is Fern once again with Trek and Trail Outdoors. Today's video, I actually debated for a little while on whether or not I wanted to make it. I didn't want to make just another knife video, but the truth is there's a reason that having a good cutting tool is #1 on your 10 Cs of Survivability, which is something that I covered in my last video. There's also a reason that a knife is the most important tool that you can carry with you when you're out in any kind of wilderness situation. So I wanted to cover what you need to look for in a good survival knife, and I'm going to cover really briefly why it's important that your knife be the most reliable piece of kit that you have. There's a few reasons why I think having a good knife is the most important part of your kit, and I think it should be the most important, or at the very least the most dependable piece of gear in your kit. A good knife is the one tool that you can have that you can use for making a fire. You can build or improve a shelter. You can repair your gear with it. You can make traps, snares, can hunt and clean game with a good knife. If you're in an urban situation or a search and rescue situation, you can cut through restraints like seat belts, cargo straps. If you're in a true survival situation, you can breach doors or windows, meaning you can gain access or even egress into or out of a building. You can also use it as a means of self-defense, whether against beast or man. And it's something that might be a little bit grim to consider, but it definitely needs to be a consideration when you're choosing a good survival knife. The other thing too is that a good survival knife can be used to make other tools and other implements, reducing your wear and tear on that knife of yours. But let's say you're out hunting, you're not going to tie your knife to the end of a stick and make a spear. What about just sharpening a stick and using that as a spear? So you can use your knife to improvise any other type of survival implement that you need. So I have an assortment of knives here on the table in front of me, and there's a couple of different categories that I want you guys to consider. All right, so the first thing that I want to make sure that everybody looks for is a fixed blade. You don't want to have something that's like this. It's a folding knife. It's just another point of failure that you have whenever you're going to be out in a true survival or wilderness situation. Anything that moves, any kind of joint, is going to be a liability. That's going to be a potential point of failure. You want to use something that's not going to break on you at all as you're using that knife for whatever reason. So this is going to be a perfect everyday carry knife, maybe something around work, something around town, but as far as a true survival knife, I wouldn't recommend something like this, at least not as the only piece of kit that you have. The other thing is something like multi-tool. A lot of these are going to have blades. This one has both a serrated and a fine edge blade, but again, there's a lot of reasons that I wouldn't recommend this necessarily as a survival knife. Again, this is great to have, but not as your only option as a cutting tool out in the wilderness or a survival situation. So once again, the best thing to have is something that's a fixed blade. Now, a fixed blade is going to be something like this with absolutely no moving parts. There's different configurations of fixed blades, which I'm going to cover in a little bit, but this is what you want, something that is one solid piece of steel from one end to the other, and that's not going to allow for any points of failure in there. The next thing that I want you guys to consider is something called a full tang. Say something like this, which has a full tang, and you can see exposed all the way through the back of that knife, all the way back to that pommel. That is one solid piece of steel. So you want something with a full tang. The thing with a full tang is that when you do have something with a full tang, the strength of that knife is going to be consistent from the front of that knife, from the tip, all the way back into the pommel. There's not going to be any weak points in that. And you also want to avoid something with a skeletonized tang, which is something I might cover in depth in another video. So you want to have something that has a tang that's about the size of your handle. The other thing is too, should that handle break off somehow, you're going to have the opportunity to still continue to use that knife even without the knife scales. You can wrap some paracord or tape around it and you can still continue to use that knife. Something like this, which is similar to that KBar that I showed earlier, that has that really skinny rat tail tang at the end. If your grips here with your stacked leather disc, if somehow they deteriorate and fall off, it's going to be almost impossible and even dangerous for you to continue using that knife in a true survival setting. So make sure that it does have a full tang that's about the size of your handle overall. The other thing that I would say you need to look for is a solid handle. So we've all seen these. These are really gimmicky. Everybody's had a fantasy at one point or another, if you like knives like I do, to own the Rambo knife. And these are the types of knives that have the hollow handle. Maybe they have a compass or something on the lid or cover to that handle. Overall, the inside of that handle is going to be just hollow. Sometimes they'll store survival items in there, but really it's just a gimmick. You want to avoid something like this at all costs. Look for something with a solid handle, something that you know isn't going to fail or break off on you. Now, the other thing with these hollow handle knives is, I don't know if you can see that, the entire blade is pinned onto the rest of that with only one little Allen screw here. That is the only thing holding that knife blade to the rest of that knife. The blade itself only extends maybe about this far into the handle, and that's it. That's the only thing that's keeping that knife together. So this will break on you the first time you try to use it heavily. So guys, avoid something with hollow handles. All right, so the other thing that I want to talk about just really briefly, and this is going to be a video that I may get into a little bit later on, but it's also another controversial point when it comes to knife enthusiasts and what people say you should or shouldn't get, and that is your blade steel. So for blade steel, there's a couple of different options that you have. There's either high carbon steel or stainless steel. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Now, blade steel, for me, my preference is going to be a high carbon steel, something like 1095, like this Rat 7 here, or the Becker BK7. High carbon steel is going to be a little tougher than stainless steel. It's going to sharpen easier but retain that edge a lot longer, and it's going to resist hard use a lot better than some stainless steels are going to. Not only that, it's going to be relatively inexpensive compared to what we call your designer steels that are out now, like LMAX or VG10, that are really tough but also rust resistant. I do have a couple knives in here that are stainless steel. This one, for example, is stainless steel, but this is really cheap steel. This is not something that I would even consider using even for light use. The other one that I have that's a stainless is this Gerber Strong Arm. This is going to be 420 HC high carbon stainless steel. It's a little more challenging to sharpen, but it does retain that edge really, really well. And it is going to be water and moisture tolerant because, again, it's going to be a stainless steel which is going to resist rust and corrosion. Personally though, like I said, I prefer a high carbon steel like any of these other ones here. Some of these are 1095, most of these are 1095 high carbon steel. I have this one in particular that's a 5160 spring steel. So it's going to take a lot of abuse and a lot of punishment, and it will bend before it breaks. So that's another consideration is, do you want something that's going to be tough? It's going to stand up to a lot of abuse and it's not going to chip or break on you, or do you want something that's going to be more corrosion resistant? Those are some of the things that you want to consider. The other thing too is you want to consider whether or not you have an uncoated blade like this one or a coated blade. Again, that is personal preference. Just be aware of the advantages and disadvantages to each. Something with a coated blade is going to be protected against rust and corrosion, while something with an uncoated blade, you will have to perform maintenance on that to keep that from rusting on you. So those are your considerations when it comes to your blade steel. Now, another part that I know is going to be really controversial is going to be the length of your blade. The length of your blade, I believe, for a good survival knife has to be between 5 and 9 inches. Anything smaller than 5 inches and you're not going to be able to do the right kinds of tasks for a survival situation. If I needed to process firewood with this knife, reduce a big log down to smaller logs and even kindling, this knife is probably not going to withstand the batoning and the chopping that you're going to need to do for something like that. Something like this might be able to do it. This is a 5-inch blade, but it's barely going to be at that lower limit of what you need to use. Here's a Becker BK2. It is also a 5-inch blade, but it's a very thick and robust blade, so you will be able to chop a lot better with this and drive that knife through bigger logs if you need to do some batoning. On the other extreme end of that is something like this Ontario SP10 Raider buoy. This might be too big for most tasks, especially considering that this knife itself weighs about 1.5 pounds. So yes, it's a great knife. It's great for self-defense, and it might be great for chopping down smaller trees or smaller logs, but you will be very fatigued after using this for just a few minutes, and also it's not going to be very comfortable riding on your belt or your hip for long periods of time. So this is a 10.5-inch blade. It might be just a little too big for most survival tasks. So my sweet spot personally is between between 6 and 7 inches, like this Ontario RD6 here, which is a 6-inch blade, and my primary knife currently, and this Becker BK7, which is a 7-inch blade. 7-inch blades are also really common in military and tactical applications. This RAT7 was originally designed as a survival knife, but also has some use in military applications. So that's a 7-inch blade, as well as the famous KBar. The KBar is also a 7-inch blade. Again, 5 to 9 inches for survival knives. That's really what you should be looking for. Okay, the next thing that I want to throw out there is your blade thickness. I really recommend you find something between 3/16 and 1/4 inch, or if you're more technical, about 0.19 to 0.25 inches. If you have something too thin like this Mora here, it's a little over 1/16 of an inch, not quite 1/8 of an inch. It's gonna be too thin for most applications. As a matter of fact, if you take this blade and flex it, you can actually flex that blade a little bit. Your blade should have 0 flex in it. Here's one that's about 3/16 of an inch. It's gonna give you good strength, and it's still going to be relatively light. And then we have those other ones that are about 0.23, it's almost 1/4 of an inch, and the Becker BK2, which is a full 1/4 inch. Again, these knives, they're going to be a little bit heavier, but they're going to provide a lot more strength and stability for some hard use. About 3/16 to about 1/4 of an inch. There are knives, it's very rare, but I've seen them where they're thicker than 1/4 of an inch. They're going to be way too heavy for you to properly wield. This one is 1/4 of an inch. It's also big. So again, it's going to be really heavy. So that's about the range that I would consider getting a survival knife in, about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch thick. Whether or not you like to use them, I would find something with a lanyard hole. And if you have a good lanyard hole on the back of your knife, you're going to open yourself up to a lot more possibilities in using that knife. A lanyard hole is good to have available, and it's good to use a lanyard if you're using the knife in some kind of environment where you're up at heights or elevation or over water. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're up in the mountains and you drop your knife down the mountainside or off a cliff, or maybe you're over water on a boat and the knife goes overboard. If something like that happens, the chances of you getting that knife back are virtually 0. For some situations like that, I would lash a lanyard through it and just use it as retention. You know, something that you're going to be able to put around your wrist or some other anchor point, and then keep control of that blade as you're using it. So if you were to drop this, obviously be careful with the way that knife swings, but at least you're not going to completely lose your blade. The other thing is, if you've got a big knife like this one right here and you need to chop something, it's going to be a lot better for you to wrap that lanyard around your hand somehow and have more control when you're chopping with it. So having a lanyard hole available, whether or not you use it, is going to be a good thing to look for in a survival knife. Another thing that a lot of people don't really consider is having a useful sheath. One of my favorite knives, just because of the historic and sentimental value, is this old Ontario 499 pilot survival knife. This was standard issue for many years for jet pilots and other aircraft crewmen to use as an egress tool and survival tool while they were rescued. It is a good little knife. There's a lot of things that I don't like about it, like the sawbacks, which are practically useless in real world situations. But the one thing that I've never really liked about this is the sheath. So this does come with a leather sheath. While it looks great and it might even be comfortable to wear, a useful sheath is something that's not going to absorb moisture or get wet and stay wet for a long period of time. This is useful insofar as it's a great sheath because it is ambidextrous and you can wear your knife right or left-handed. But other than that, there's not a lot of lashing options for you. There's a couple of holes here at the bottom, and there's a couple little holes here at the top. But the biggest drawback is that if leather gets wet, it stays wet, and that's going to corrode your blade, especially if you have a high carbon steel. The other ones that I don't like are these nylon sheaths that are kind of a generic one-size-fits-all. Now the thing with these sheaths is that they're pretty durable and they're relatively water resistant, but they are generic. They don't offer some really good retention. So if you put your knife in something like this, if you're not fastening your straps down properly, you run the risk of losing your blade in just regular movement. Plus, they don't fit very great. Basic thing about this one also is that it doesn't flex. So if you're walking around, you need to sit down, or you need to find yourself in another position other than just standing. This is going to be kind of obtrusive. So what I mean by a useful sheath is, number one, something that's going to properly protect your knife. It's going to give you good retention, but it's also going to allow you the freedom of movement that you need for whatever task you have at hand. My personal choice, especially with the blade that I carry, is Kydex. Kydex sheath. This is a custom-made sheath, and Kydex, number one, is waterproof. So even if it does get wet, you can shake it off and it'll dry out really quickly. It doesn't absorb any water. The other thing is, it's got great retention. So when you put the blade in there, it snaps into place and it's not going anywhere. I've added an additional retention strap here that is adjustable just in case, but for the most part it's not needed. That blade is in there pretty good until you decide to pull it out yourself. And you know, again, Kydex is going to be lightweight. It's not going to absorb any moisture or water, and it's going to be fairly impact and scuff resistant. So a useful sheath is going to be ideally Kydex. If not that, then you want to have something that you're going to find useful for your own applications, and it's going to be comfortable for you to actually use. Remember, your knife is no good to you if you do not carry it everywhere you go. So get a sheath that allows you to do that. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to cover is the difference between tactical and survival. A lot of knife enthusiasts will tell you, get this knife or this knife, which is designed for tactical application. And that may or may not be the best thing for survival. We've already talked about these Rambo style knives. They're completely useless for true survival situations. Any kind of serrations on the back or a sawback type spine is completely useless in real scenarios. If you need to saw wood, pack a folding saw. That's something I'm going to cover in another video. But these are points of weakness for that blade. Not only that, that potentially is going to eliminate the usefulness for you when you need to baton that blade through a piece of wood. So anything with a sawback is not great for true survival situations. A lot of tactical blades are going to have these sawback serrations. You really want to stay away from those for true survival. The other thing is, there are some knives that are designed really kind of only for fighting. This knife, for example, this is the Ontario RAK, the Ranger Assault Knife. It's a great knife, but it really is designed for fighting. The point on it is a spear point, so this is designed primarily for stabbing and piercing, for thrusting kind of attacks. The cutting edge on that, you could see, is only about 5 inches out of a 6-inch blade because of that gigantic finger choil there. So you're losing a lot of blade real estate because of its design. Now, the reason this finger choil is there isn't for you to choke up on that blade for woodcraft. It's actually so you could use that non-lethal pommel on the back and for you to have a better grip on it when employing that non-lethal striking surface. Again, this knife is a great knife. It's great for fighting, not great for survival or any kind of wilderness use. The handle is really small. It's very straight. There's no positive purchase on that blade if you need to use it for chopping or some other kind of woodcraft. This is something that's more tactical, not survival. The other one is the KBar. The KBar is designed as a tactical fighting knife. However, this knife does have some features that would also allow you to use it as a survival knife. No serrations on the back, but it does have that double edge right here, that swedge there at the tip, and that is sharpened. So that could possibly pose a hazard for you in a survival situation or in some genuine woodcraft use. Also, no lanyard hole, so for my purposes, this knife, just with those two things alone, would be eliminated. The cross guard on this is a point of personal preference. Some people like it, some people don't. I personally don't like to have a guard on the top of the blade, but again, that's a point of personal preference. But anyway, great knife. For me, this wouldn't be a good survival knife. Now, the Rat 7, on the other hand, it's specifically designed as a survival knife, and the tactical applications were only secondary. So here we have a straight spine all the way to the tip with no gimmicky serrations or any other shape. You can use this for batoning through a piece of wood with another stick or a mallet of some kind. Comfortable grips. There's a good quillion here right behind the guard so that you can use it. It has somewhat of a finger choil. You can choke up on that blade if you need to use it for finer tasks. And it's got a lanyard hole in the back. So for me, this would be an excellent choice of survival and not tactical. Becker BK7 is a perfect combination of both. It's got good purchase on the grip, nice comfortable grips, flat pommel, no serrations on the back. It does have a thumb wrap, but that doesn't seem to get in the way for me. The point here, the tip, does have that swedge here, but it is not sharpened. I think that's more for aesthetics rather than any kind of fighting use, but it does provide you some better piercing and stabbing capabilities. So again, this is a perfect blend of survival and tactical, as well as this one, the RD6, which is kind of a cross between the Rat 7 and the Becker BK7. And this is a tactical knife designed by an Army Ranger, Justin Gingrich, but it's got elements that place it kind of in both categories of tactical and survival. And I'll be talking about this knife a lot more in detail in another video. Alright guys, thank you so much for sitting through this video. I know that it was a long video, but there's a lot of information that I really wanted you guys to understand, as well as a lot of information that's out on the internet that can be really confusing to some of you guys that are looking for a good survival knife, maybe looking to purchase your first knife or upgrading something that you already have. And because there is a lot of information out there on the internet, I wanted to sift through all of that and kind of condense it into something that I've personally found more usable in real situations and in real world scenarios. Just to recap, your knife is the most important tool that you have in your outdoor survival kit, your wilderness kit, or your general survival kit, whether you're in an urban situation or in the deep woods or anything in between. Your knife should be the most reliable piece of equipment that you have in your kit. My personal philosophy is it should be the most expensive, or at the very least the most dependable piece of gear in your kit. But obviously your own budget and your own need is going to dictate what you want. I'm not telling you to go out there and spend $100 or $200 or $300 on a designer or a custom built survival knife. You can get something that's relatively inexpensive and still very, very dependable. My three favorites of everything that I showed you guys here are Becker BK7. This is fully customized. I've stripped the coating off of it and added micarta handles. The other one is the Rat 7, and again, the Rat 7 was designed as specifically a survival knife. Very reliable knife. And of course, the main knife that I'm using right now is the Ontario RD6. This one is one of those kind of crossover designs that is both tactical and survival. This particular one may or may not still be available. I know that Ontario Knife Company shows it as out of stock on their website, and many more of the resellers are also showing them out of stock. So we'll talk about this one a little bit more in another video. But alright guys, that's pretty much the end of this video. Thank you so much for sitting through the whole thing. I know there was a lot of information. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or if you think I maybe missed some things, or if you wanted to hear about something more in particular, again, make sure to leave a comment down in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is a brand new project for me, and I'd love to see you guys support and encourage this for it to continue further. Also, I apologize for my crazy dog, but what can I say? He's a dog. So guys, thank you so much once again. Check back frequently in this channel. I'm gonna have a few more videos up here really soon, and if there's any topic or anything that you want me to talk about specifically, don't forget to include it in the comments. Thanks again, you guys. Be safe, be prepared, and go find your outdoors.